Seven Wonders, a game about eating your greens, ores, and wood. What the heck do I mean? Well, before I get to that, welcome to Rest and Reason and our Seven Wonders House Rules video. This gives a little bit of how we play to try to make the game a little bit better because it's already a great foundation. So, let's get right into what was I talking about? Well, I was talking about the best strategy for playing Seven Wonders. Ultimately, it's all about getting either greens or going for certain resource cards. Specifically, the resource cards with two different kinds of resources on them. And specifically, the ore and wood resources. You see, these two resources show up more than any other resources in the game and will provide the highest value, at least in the original game. Now, the original game was going for the main genre of Eurogame. Eurogames are trying to mix player interaction and you being in charge of your own game. And ultimately, as we know with Seven Wonders, those really are the two biggest factors. If somebody else takes the card that you want, then it's not there for you. And even though the first hand is luck, it's so minimal of luck for that first hand. From then on, it's all up to you and what other people do. The main mechanic is tableau building, which, as I've mentioned before in this video, is just another form of engine building, but a smaller version of it. It also has a sub-mechanic of resource management. Now, it's funny because I would actually say the main feel of this game is resource management. Although it's supposed to be a civilization game, the whole past drafting makes the game not feel very thematic because what you're doing, passing around cards and putting down buildings, doesn't feel thematic. Now, the cards work really hard to make it feel like a thematic game. And honestly, they do a decent job for a game that is so mechanically not thematic, but they just don't do well enough to even get it past average. Now, ultimately, I don't give this game a gold recliner, and that might have you asking, why not? This is a top 100 Board Game Geek game. It is well known to be beloved by board gamers for a long time. Why doesn't it quite reach it? Well, it ultimately comes down to diminishing enjoyment. The more you play Seven Wonders, the more you're going to crave expansions. And not that I don't love a good expansion, but ultimately expansions mean more money and more space taken up by the same game. Whereas if you get a game that has a lot of playthrough value, then you're going to be able to just play that particular game over and over and not pour any more money into it. Second, it's poorly balanced, and this is part of the reason why the game has diminishing enjoyment. A lot of the cards are just outright worse than the others. I did the math. You can look at it here, this picture. This shows what I went through to figure out what things were better than other things. And ultimately, it came down to the fact that some of the cards, like I mentioned already about green and certain resource cards, are just significantly better than things such as the commodities, those textiles, glass, and papyrus. They just aren't as good as the other cards. Finally, there's such a limited theme that this game's not going to be easy to sell to people to make them feel the theme as much as it's going to be easy to sell to them just as a fun, quick experience, which isn't a horrible thing and can totally come to your table, but I'm always wanting just a little bit more theme. If you like this content so far, make sure to subscribe and keep watching this video. Now to our house rules, which aim to kind of fix some of those issues that I showed above, but ultimately these are house rules, our own personal way of trying to make this game more enjoyable for us and hopefully for you as well. Our first house rule is about war points, where we compare to everybody around the table instead of just the people next to you. In addition to this, you get more points in a larger player game, thus offsetting the fact that you're getting higher and lower risk. This means that people losing generally won't get less points. I have a chart right here saying how many points you get because ultimately it is dependent on number of players and whether you get first, second, third, or last. Last place gets -1, and then first, second, and third get progressively worse bonuses, and of course they get better with each age. So that chart's here and also down in a link in the description. Our second change is a trade system that's a little bit changed. First, your country at the beginning of each turn, which means right before they choose their card, gets to say, I'm open or closed for trade. If you are open for trade, people can of course buy things from you pretty much as usual. I'll explain a little bit more about that in a minute. But if you say you are closed for trade, nobody except for you can use your resources. This will make the game A, feel more thematic, but also lead to a lot more discussion and interaction with the other players, which already happens because of the pass drafting, but you don't actually look up and talk to the other players very often. Now you're going to have to. You're going to have to try to convince them, hey, if you stay open, I'll stay open. Hey, if you do this, maybe I won't go into military as much. You're going to have to talk to them about it. Or if you want to go quick, you just say closed. I'm not talking about it. Closed. Or open. I just want money. Whatever you choose. Now, I also changed how much things cost. Brown cards now cost $2 per resource, and gray cards now cost $3 per resource. This helps offset the cost that the brown is just way more common on cards than the gray, and therefore you need to have that compensation for the fact that it doesn't come up as often. This leads me to my final house rule, which is color bonuses. 3 different colors needed color bonuses to compete with the other ones. First off, purple. You get a 5-point bonus if you have the most purples. This is because the original purples cost so much that they end up being kind of bad compared to some of the ones that you could get for free by grabbing ones earlier in the game. On top of this, we have the yellow bonus. Now, yellow might not seem underpowered, but actually, based off of how much benefit you get for playing it, it's actually an extremely undervalued group, except for the cards that give you points based off of what you've already played. But those have their own category and aren't really meant to be fixed by this. Ultimately, though, my change for yellow is 1 point for one of your neighbor's stuff. So in this case, it works a lot like a guild, but instead of for both of your neighbors, you have to choose one of your neighbors. You choose that neighbor, and you get 1 point for each of their brown and gray cards. Now, this represents the fact that as a trade empire, you become known for trading with this other group that has a lot of resources. Just like a lot of the caravans did for going to Africa, or a lot of the groups who went to the East and China became famous for bringing Chinese goods. You don't always have to have the goods yourself, but if you're a yellow faction, you got to deliver the best goods. And then finally, gray. With gray, every turn that you don't use your gray card for your own stuff, you can now get $1. Now, of course, this is half the value of the resource. Of course, the resource would usually cost $2, but it still helps these resources be more useful, especially because they don't show up very often on the cards. So, all of these changes aim to make this game a little bit better, but like I said, these are our house rules. I'm very curious, do you guys have house rules for Seven Wonders, or are you a Seven Wonders purist who is furious at me for even mentioning the idea and audacity of ruining a perfect game? I know that there will be several of you in the comments, and I'd love to hear from you because I want people to know both sides of this particular thought. The original score for this game is a 3.57 out of 5. That makes it a silver recliner. It's a general recommendation. It's an incredibly fun game, and it's a game that my family immediately picked up, as many families do. It's very accessible, and it's incredibly detailed and crunchy, but the balance issues led to our house rules. However, with our house rules, I would give this game a 4.07 out of 5. And that gives it a gold recliner. I would say with just a few small house rules, you can make this game really, really well balanced and all about adapting to the other players and playing your own strategy, which is what Euro games are all about. They're about adapting to what other people do. Because yes, green might be good. And yes, blue might be good. They're all good. But, oh, they're going for green. Which means if I go for green, I'm going to get less points going for green this time. You have to adapt. And my version makes it a little bit more of that. And ultimately, it also makes it a little bit more thematic because you don't just trade with people willy-nilly, you have to get their permission to trade. So if you appreciated this, please make sure to hit that like button, comment, subscribe, and if you can, $1 to our Patreon per month will help us keep bringing this content and hopefully helping you enjoy your games more. And as always, thank you so much for joining us today on Rest and Reason.